Hey folks, I'm Jack Fossett, and welcome to this demo and review of the Blackstar Silverline Stereo Deluxe. We're going to start with some tones here, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about this amp, some of my likes and dislikes. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. So again, this is the Stereo Deluxe Silverline amplifier. Now, there's a whole line of Silverline amplifiers, and they range from smaller, more gig-friendly, something you can just kind of use at home, to much bigger, stage-worthy stuff. They have a head and cab. This one that you're listening to is the 212 Stereo Deluxe. It has Celestion V-type speakers in it. This is a great amp, and what they were going for with the Silverline model is a high-end digital modeling amp that gives you not only a lot of realistic tones, but the realistic feel of a tube amp. You have a range of styles on this knob that gives you, you've got warm clean, bright clean, crunch, super crunch, and then a couple of ODs. That kind of gives you your level of gain, along with, of course, a gain knob. But what's really unique about this one is then it gives you different power tube emulations. So that really lets you tailor your sound and really kind of dive into a different world of tube amp emulation. They're very responsive. The feel is very tube-like. Now, the other really cool thing is this amp also has Blackstar's ISF control, which is the infinite shape feature. And that is something that's been around on a lot of amps before, and what it does essentially, working along with your tone controls, is it gives you, in a nutshell, sounds a little bit more like an American amp if you roll it all the way to the left, sounds a little bit more like a British amp if you roll it all the way to the right. This is sort of a contour feature. There's a lot going on with it, but a little bit more scooped American sounding on the left, a little bit more punchy upper mid-range on the right. So now, that's really cool in conjunction with the power tube emulation. And this is something that, the ISF control has been around for a long time, but I haven't seen it on an amp that has this realistic a variation in amp sounds. So like, for instance, if you're going to the EL84 sound, which is kind of a classic Voxy sound, well, one thing I've always kind of wanted in an amplifier is kind of a Vox tone with an American response. So, like, basically, like, I wish I could blend a Fender Bassman and a Vox AC30 into one thing in the middle. Well, you can do that very realistically with this amp. You can switch to the EL84, roll the ISF all the way to the left, giving you the American tone, whatever various level of gain you want. Or you could go vice versa, like you could go with the 6L6, roll the ISF all the way to the right. 6L6 is a very classic American power tube, kind of like a Fender sound, like a Super Reverb or a Fender Bassman, or, you know, Mesa Boogies have used them. And then the ISF feature kind of changes the responsiveness of that. Really, really cool tonal flexibility. But one of the things that I like about it beyond that is it's very easy to dial in a lot of good tones. So now, as far as responsiveness, as far as realism, I've never found a digital modeling amp that felt as much like a tube amp as far as responsiveness. Especially on some of the modes, it really feels like you're playing a tube amp, the way that the notes kind of sag and bounce off the fingerboard a little bit. It doesn't have that flatter response like a lot of digital amps. EQ-wise, I kind of found it was a little bit in the middle. It didn't have that sort of omnipresent mid-range swell warmth like you get in a lot of tube amps. But the flip side of that is EQ-wise, I think you have a lot of range on the EQ, and this is something that I think when it comes to tube amps versus digital amps, I think in a lot of cases, many players are actually going to be more happy if you're looking at something under $1,000. You're probably going to be happier in most cases with a high-end digital modeler than you are with a lower level tube amp. And the reason that I say that is, in guitar, we want to emulate the sound, usually, of a lot of our heroes, or get some variation thereof. Remember that the tones that you're inspired by, which are probably from classic tube amps, when you're listening to them, unless you're actually at the concert, you're hearing a high-end reproduction of that tone, which means it's going through EQs and compressors, among various other things. And when you get a lower level tube amp, for instance, a lot of lower level tube amps, the EQ you don't have a lot of usable range on because they're just going to be too spiky, they're going to be too bright, they're going to be too brash. They might not get really good gain tones unless you really, really warm them up. And for a realistic, for instance, practice, small gigs, home studio, you're going to get more of a tone closer to the tones that you're inspired by, I think, from a digital modeler. Now, when you get to higher level tube amps, that might not be the case, but if you're looking at spending $500 to $800 on an amp, you're probably going to get a better reproduction of the tones that you're looking for from a high-end modeler. From my perspective, that's the honest truth. I'm not trying to pull a fast one on anyone here, and I love tube amps, and that's where ultimately the real tones come from. But just in this context and at this price range, open your mind a little bit, because modern emulation is really, really good these days. The way that I relate that to the EQ is, again, I think you have more range on the EQ on this amp than you would a lot of other amps, specifically tube amps in this price range. It does still get really bright, particularly at higher volumes, so be prepared to turn the treble and the presence back. You also have a resonance control, which functions with the bass. A lot of tweaking ability. The digital effects on this are really, really nice. In the stereo, they sound superb. I really, really like the stereo effects on this particular model. The one thing that I don't like about the Stereo Deluxe is I'm really not crazy about big, heavy modeling amps. This is a big 212. It's not as heavy as a Mesa Boogie or, you know, a lot of other amps, like tube amps that are 212s. But it is heavy, it's cumbersome, it's a little tricky to carry around. Whether or not that's worth it for the stereo effects, that's something that you'd have to, you know, depends on what you're using this amp for. If it's going to just sit in your home studio, then that's great. If you're looking for a gigging amp, it depends on how much you need the stereo. But I loved the effects on this. I think that the effects are great. A lot of versatility as far as practical use. Comes with a 4-button foot switch, allows you to, you know, save presets for your favorite tones and effects and all kinds of things. And I'm not really going to get into that. I'm more going to talk about just kind of the tones that you can get in this demo. This isn't a how-to. It also works with Blackstar's Insider software, which I played around a little bit with. The one thing that I found a little disappointing with this amp was I found that plugging it in and recording it into a DAW via USB, the quality of tone was significantly less than the way that it sounds in person. So I think if you're getting this amp for home studio use, you're still going to get a better sound miking it up than you are plugging direct in. Is it usable direct in? It's usable. You might have to use some pretty wacky EQ techniques, and it's probably more than passable, but I wouldn't look at it as an option for finished product unless you're talking about something that's sitting in the mix with a lot of other instruments. If you're looking at something where the guitar is really standing out, I found that plugging it in directly with USB, it had a little bit more of that digital responsiveness, that digital harshness like you would normally expect from an amp like this. Now, I didn't find it was like that sitting with it in person. I found it very realistic sounding in person. But plugging it in via USB, it was a little bit more like a digital modeler. Now, folks, this is just my honest opinion. Again, if you use this USB straight in as a digital modeler and you really, really like it and it works for you, that's great. I'm not trying to knock anybody. I'm just giving you my opinion. This was how I found it in my setup and for the tones that I was looking for. Now, for this demo, what I want to do is play just a bunch of different tones that I found particularly inspiring on various power tube settings, on various gain settings, using various different effects and all kinds of things. And I'll show you the way that I have them set up. I'm not going to do a lot of tweaking, although I will show you some back and forth with the ISF control and some of the effects. But I really just wanted to go through a handful of sounds that I particularly liked, and just so that you can hear the realistic range of this amplifier, all the way from really realistic tube amp clean to much heavier distorted territory. What I think is really cool is they really nailed the warm in the middle. Usually with digital modelers, you get great clean tones, you get great heavy distortion tones, but it's those kind of classic rock, overdriven breakup tones that don't sound as realistic. This one, I think, really does a great job across the board, again, if you're playing with it in person. For this demo, I'm using two different guitars. You're hearing it with this one. This is a Musicman Mariposa. This is a superb dual humbucking guitar. I'm going to give you the humbucker tones with this one. For the single coil tones, I'm using a Tone Lustcaster Holy Relic. Gorgeous, gorgeous custom boutique Stratocaster. Again, that one for the single coil tones, this one for the humbucking tones, plugging direct in, not really doing anything fancy except showing you some of the different presets that I personally like. Please let me know, do you have a Silverline? Are you wanting a Silverline? Do you use it for digital recording? Do you think that I was totally off base on that? Or did you find the same thing as far as digital recording? What's your use? What are you looking for with it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? What's your experience? Let us know in the comments. I'm Jack Fossett. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Stick around for some more tones, and we'll see you next time.